Stand at the edge of Windsor Home Park, and you'll see something that doesn't match the postcards. A house the color of faded roses. 4 bedrooms. No staff quarters. No grand entrance hall where diplomats gather. This is Adelaide Cottage, home to the future King of England and his family. Beautiful. Yes, but this house was never just a retreat from London traffic. Behind that pink facade lies a story the tours don't mention. A cottage built from the ruins of another royal building. A love affair that nearly broke the monarchy. What truth hides behind the choice to live here, in this specific house, on this specific land, when palaces stand empty across England? Who actually paid for the renovation that made this historic structure livable for modern royals? The real question isn't why they moved to Windsor. The real question is what Adelaide Cottage represents in a monarchy that is running out of time to prove it still matters. Can a 4-bedroom house save the future of an institution built on spectacle and distance? Stand here long enough, and you start to see the foundations shifting beneath the fairy tale. Windsor, not London. That choice alone rewrites the map of royal power. For nearly 2 centuries, the seat of British monarchy has been urban Buckingham Palace in the heart of London, with Kensington Palace serving as the working residence for senior royals. The architecture of empire demanded visibility. Grand gates, public squares, tourist routes that reinforced the idea that royalty existed in the same city as ordinary people, just elevated above them. The message was proximity with separation. You could see the palace. You could watch the guards change. But you could never cross the threshold. William and Catherine rejected that geography entirely in August 2022. Adelaide Cottage sits within Windsor. Home Park, a 655-acre private expanse of gardens, woodlands, and water features that surrounds Windsor Castle. The park is not open to the public. No guided tours, no souvenir shops. The land itself functions as a boundary acres of controlled green space that keep the world at a measured distance. To reach Adelaide Cottage, you must pass through gates monitored by royal protection officers. You must navigate private roads that don't appear on public maps. The cottage itself stands roughly a 10-minute walk from Windsor Castle, close enough for family visits, far enough that you cannot stumble upon it by accident. The move happened quietly. No official photographs of the family arriving. No press event to mark the transition. 1 month, the Prince and Princess of Wales lived in apartment 1A at Kensington Palace, a 20-room residence where Charles and Diana once lived. The next month, they lived in 4 bedrooms in Windsor. George was 9. Charlotte was 7. Louis was 4. The children enrolled at Lambrook School, a private coeducational institution minutes from the cottage. Staff commute in daily rather than live on site. Security remains constant but invisible. From the outside, this looks like a family choosing normalcy, choosing to raise children away from paparazzi lenses and tourist crowds, choosing a smaller life. But stand in Windsor Home Park at dusk when the gates close and the isolation becomes clear. This is not a normal neighborhood. There are no neighbors in the conventional sense. No corner shops. No school friends who live down the street. The geography here is not suburban normalcy. It is controlled withdrawal of a royal family, removing itself from the friction of urban life, from the daily encounter with people who might question, critique, or simply witness how power actually lives. Adelaide Cottage is not an escape. It is a fortification disguised as simplicity. The cottage was built in 1831, but built is not quite accurate. Adelaide Cottage was assembled from the remains of something that no longer exists. Sir Geoffrey Wyatville designed it, the same architect who transformed Windsor Castle into the Gothic Revival fortress still recognizable today. Wyatville was hired by King George IV to modernize Windsor, and he approached the task with surgical ambition, removing medieval structures, adding battlements, raising towers. The project consumed years and cost approximately £1 million, equivalent to roughly £115 million in 2025 currency. Wyatville became one of the most powerful architects in Britain. And when he was commissioned to create a cottage for Queen Adelaide, wife of King William IV, he did not start from scratch. He scavenged. Materials came from the Royal Lodge, a former residence in Windsor Great Park that was being dismantled and rebuilt elsewhere. Stone, timber, decorative elements. Wyatville transported these fragments to the site where Adelaide Cottage would rise, constructing a new building from the bones of an old one. This is not metaphor. The cottage physically incorporates architectural elements that once belonged to a different royal structure. A house built from ruins carries its history in every beam. The exterior measures modest by royal standards: 4 bedrooms, no ballroom, no formal receiving rooms that could accommodate state dinners. The front facade is painted soft pink, a color that photographs almost like an apology. White trim frames the windows and roofline. Ivy and mature trees press close to the walls, softening the edges further. From certain angles, Adelaide Cottage could pass for a wealthy Victorian country house, the kind a successful barrister might have owned. Charming, intimate, deliberately understated. Step inside, and the ruin theory deepens. The main bedroom ceiling is not painted plaster. It is gilded rope and dolphin ornament salvaged from a 19th century royal yacht. When you lie in bed in that room, you are staring at decorative elements that once adorned a ship, maritime symbols of navigation and adventure, repurposed as bedroom decor for a landlocked cottage. The marble fireplace in the Queen's drawing room follows Greco-Egyptian design principles, popular in the 1830s, carved with motifs that reference ancient empires. These are not reproductions. These are original pieces, moved here from other structures, pressed into service for a building that needed instant historical credibility. Adelaide Cottage was never meant to stand on its own architectural merit. It was designed to feel historic by borrowing the authority of older, grander structures. A Frankenstein house. Beautiful, yes, but composed entirely of fragments that once belonged elsewhere. Queen Adelaide did not ask for this cottage. Born Princess Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen in 1792, she married William, Duke of Clarence, in 1818. He was 52. She was 25. The marriage was political, arranged to secure succession after the death of Princess Charlotte of Wales left the royal line uncertain. William needed legitimate heirs. Adelaide provided stability, patience, and a willingness to accept her role without demanding center stage. She had 2 daughters, both of whom died in infancy. By the time William became King William IV in 1830, Adelaide had learned to occupy royal life with quiet dignity, attending functions, supporting charities, avoiding scandal. The cottage was built for her in 1831, shortly after William's coronation. Contemporary newspapers described it as extraordinarily elegant, a private retreat where the Queen could escape the formalities of Windsor Castle. But Adelaide's letters suggest ambivalence. She appreciated beauty, but did not require grandeur. She attended church regularly, supported causes related to women's welfare and education, and spent much of her time nursing the king, whose health declined steadily throughout his reign. William IV died in 1837, leaving Adelaide a widow at 44. She lived another 12 years, moving between various royal residences, never settling permanently at the cottage that bore her name. The cottage became her legacy by association, not by choice. She visited it. She took tea in the gardens. But the building itself was more symbol than sanctuary, proof that the monarchy could provide elegant retreats for its queens, even when those queens had little power and less joy. What Adelaide understood, and what the architecture of her cottage quietly confirms, is that beauty is often compensation for absence. The cottage was lovely. Her daughters were dead. The marriage had been duty. The crown passed to Victoria, and Adelaide became a footnote remembered primarily through a building she did not design and did not need. Windsor Home Park is not a park in the public sense. It is a 665-acre private estate functioning as a security perimeter. The land includes formal gardens, woodland groves, a private lake, and the Long Walk, a tree-lined avenue stretching nearly 3 miles from Windsor Castle to the Copper Horse statue on Snow Hill. Tourists can walk the Long Walk, but Adelaide Cottage sits behind gates that do not open for visitors. To reach the cottage, you must be cleared by royal protection officers. The roads are private. The surrounding properties house other members of the royal family or senior staff. King Charles III and Queen Camilla use nearby Royal Lodge when in Windsor. Prince Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, live at Bagshot Park, also within the broader Windsor estate network. This is not a neighborhood. It is a compound. Security operates on multiple layers: perimeter fencing, CCTV networks, armed officers. The Metropolitan Police Protection Command maintains a constant but invisible presence, vehicles parked discreetly, officers dressed in civilian clothes, communication systems linking every residence to a central command post. The public never sees this machinery. The photographs show a pink cottage surrounded by trees. What they do not show is the infrastructure required to maintain the illusion of simplicity. Staff commute in daily. Maria Borallo, the family's nanny, arrives in the morning and leaves in the evening. Housekeepers, chefs, administrative assistants. They move through the cottage during working hours, then depart. No live-in staff means no servants' quarters, no bell systems, no hierarchical domestic structure visible within the house itself. This creates the appearance of a normal family life. Parents cooking breakfast, children doing homework, bedtime routines without audiences. But normal families do not require armed security. Normal families do not live behind gates within a private royal park. The absence of visible staff does not mean the absence of labor. It means the labor has been moved offstage, hidden behind the same architectural principle that governs Adelaide Cottage itself. Present the facade, conceal the machinery. The cottage has 4 bedrooms. George, Charlotte, and Louise each have their own room. William and Catherine share the 4th. No guest suites. No rooms for extended stays by other family members. This is deliberate, a spatial arrangement that reinforces the nuclear family unit and limits who can enter the domestic sphere. When King Charles visits, he does not stay overnight at Adelaide Cottage. He returns to Windsor Castle or Royal Lodge. The boundary is architectural. Heating comes from modern systems installed during renovations. Electricity is no longer the weak connection Peter Townsend complained about in the 1940s. The cottage now runs on updated wiring integrated with Windsor estate infrastructure. Water comes from municipal supply, not wells. The building looks historic. The systems are contemporary. And the cost of maintaining those systems, upgrading security, and staffing the daily operations is absorbed into the broader Sovereign Grant and Duchy of Cornwall budgets line items that never specify. Adelaide Cottage renovations, but fund the lifestyle nonetheless. This is how modern monarchy works. The cottage appears modest. The infrastructure supporting that appearance costs millions annually, and the bills are paid by an institution that no longer explains its expenses in granular detail. In 2015, Adelaide Cottage underwent major restoration. The official description called it essential maintenance to preserve a historic, Grade II listed building. The cost was never publicly disclosed. The work took months. And when it finished, the cottage had been transformed from a structure Peter Townsend described as shabby and freezing into a residence suitable for the future King of England. Renovation details remain scarce. No architectural plans were released, no contractor names, no itemized budgets. What is known comes from fragments, planning documents filed with local councils, brief mentions in royal correspondence reports, comparative analysis of similar restoration projects on historic properties. Based on these fragments, estimates suggest the 2015 renovation cost between £1.5 million and £3 million, enough to replace outdated systems, restore historic features, and modernize interiors without altering the Grade II listed exterior. Who paid? The sovereign grant, most likely, though the funds could have come from the Duchy of Cornwall, the private estate that funds the Prince of Wales. The distinction matters. Sovereign grant money comes from UK taxpayers, channeled through an agreement that allocates a percentage of Crown estate profits to the monarchy. Duchy funds are technically private, though the duchy itself exists because of hereditary land ownership that predates modern taxation. Either way, the cost of making Adelaide Cottage livable for William and Catherine was not borne by William and Catherine. It was absorbed into the financial architecture of monarchy, an infrastructure that transforms public and quasi-public funds into private comfort. The 2015 renovation addressed structural issues but retained historic elements. The gilded dolphin ceiling in the master bedroom remained. The Greco-Egyptian fireplace stayed. Original window frames were repaired rather than replaced. This is standard practice for Grade II listed buildings in Britain. Alterations must preserve historical character. But it also means the cottage exists in a permanent state of historical performance. You cannot gut-renovate a Grade II listed building and install floor-to-ceiling glass walls. You must live within the aesthetic constraints of 1831 architecture, even as modern plumbing, heating, and electrical systems hide behind the walls. When William and Catherine moved in 7 years later, further updates occurred. These are described as minor adjustments for family living, a phrase vague enough to mean anything from repainting walls to reconfiguring bathrooms. Again, no costs disclosed, no public accounting. The assumption is that the Duchy of Cornwall covered these expenses, since William became Duke of Cornwall when Charles became king. The duchy generates approximately £23 million annually in net income, which William uses to fund his family's private expenses and official duties. But here's the tension. The cottage is not owned by William. It is a grace and favor property owned by the Crown, offered for use by the monarch to family members or loyal servants. William and Catherine do not pay rent. They do not hold the deed. They live there because the institution permits it. And when they leave, the cottage will remain Crown property, available for the next occupant deemed worthy. This arrangement reveals the central paradox of modern royal wealth. William and Catherine live in a house they do not own, renovated with money they did not directly earn, secured by a system they inherited but did not build. They are both beneficiaries and prisoners of institutional architecture, free to enjoy the cottage but never free to claim it as truly theirs. Peter Townsend moved into Adelaide Cottage in 1944, when it was still cold, shabby, and barely electrified. He was a group captain in the Royal Air Force, a decorated war hero, and an equerry to King George VI. The position placed him in constant proximity to the royal family attending events, coordinating schedules, traveling with the king. He was 29, married with 2 sons, and by all accounts professionally competent. He met Princess Margaret when she was 13. By the time Margaret turned 18, Townsend had divorced his wife. Margaret had grown into a beautiful, vivacious young woman trapped in the rigid expectations of mid-century British royalty. She was second in line to the throne after her older sister Elizabeth, which meant her personal life was public property. And she fell in love with a divorced man 16 years, her senior, who lived in a cottage within walking distance of Windsor Castle. The relationship became public during Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in 1953, when Margaret was photographed brushing lint off Townsend's uniform, a gesture of intimacy too obvious to ignore. The tabloids exploded. The Church of England forbade divorced individuals from remarrying in church, which created a constitutional crisis. If Margaret married Townsend, she would have to renounce her place in the line of succession and lose her royal income. The government pressured her to end the relationship. The Archbishop of Canterbury made clear his disapproval. Margaret was 23 years old, in love, and facing a choice between personal happiness and institutional loyalty. She chose the institution. In October 1955, Margaret released a statement. "I would like it to be known that I have decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend." The language was formal, restrained, designed to convey dignity. But friends later described her as devastated. Townsend was transferred out of the royal household and eventually moved to Belgium, where he remarried and lived quietly until his death in 1995. Margaret married photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones in 1960, had 2 children, divorced in 1978, and spent the rest of her life smoking, drinking, and attending parties with a weariness that suggested unhealed wounds. Adelaide Cottage was where this love story began. The cottage provided the proximity that made the relationship possible. Townsend living mere minutes from the royal residences, encountering Margaret regularly, developing the closeness that would eventually break both their hearts. No plaque marks this history. No guided tours mention that Princess Margaret, as great doomed romance, started in the pink cottage behind the trees. The building simply absorbed the scandal into its walls, the same way it absorbed the gilded dolphins and Greco-Egyptian marble fragments of other stories, pressed into service, never quite explained. George Alexander Louis, Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, Louis Arthur Charles. 3 children who will never choose their names, never choose their titles, never choose whether their lives belong to them or to the institution that claims them as symbols. George, born July 2013, is second in line to the throne. He will likely be king. That fact shapes every decision his parents make about his upbringing, where he goes to school, who he interacts with, what behaviors are acceptable, what freedoms can be permitted before the institution intervenes. He is 11 years old enough to understand he is different, not yet old enough to understand what that difference will cost. Charlotte, born May 2015, holds a unique position. She is a princess, but will never be queen unless something catastrophic happens. She exists in the strange liminal space of royal life, visible enough to attract media attention, peripheral enough to potentially build a life, outside the direct line of succession. But that freedom is conditional. She must remain useful to the institution without outshining her brother or demanding too much autonomy. Louis, born April 2018, is even further from the throne. 5th in line now, and dropping lower with each child George eventually has. Louis's future is the most uncertain. He could become the spare who resents his role like Prince Harry. He could fade into comfortable obscurity like minor European royals who attend events but wield no real influence. He could reject the institution entirely and face the consequences. All 3 children live in Adelaide Cottage, a house with no staff quarters. Their nanny commutes in. Their security officers maintain perimeters, but do not live inside the domestic space. The goal, according to royal correspondence, is to give the children a normal childhood. But what does normal mean inside a grace and favor cottage within a private royal park? Normal means attending Lambrook School, a private coeducational institution where annual fees exceed £20,000 per child. Normal means being driven to school by protection officers in unmarked vehicles. Normal means playdates that must be vetted for security risks. Normal means growing up knowing your face is public property, every photograph analyzed, every outfit critiqued, every milestone documented by a media apparatus that treats royal children as entertainment. Catherine has stated publicly that she wants her children to learn responsibility, kindness, and resilience. She encourages them to make their beds, help with chores, and spend time outdoors. These are good parenting principles. They are also the bare minimum any parent tries to teach. The difference is that George, Charlotte, and Louis will never have the option to fail privately. Their mistakes will be public. Their rebellions will be news cycles. Their attempts to forge independent identities will be interpreted through the lens of institutional duty. The 4 bedrooms at Adelaide Cottage offer physical privacy space for children to retreat, to have rooms of their own, to exist without constant adult supervision. But the cottage itself sits inside a geographic and institutional cage. The children can play in Windsor Home Park. They cannot walk to a friend's house unsupervised. They can attend school events. They cannot blend into the crowd. They can have birthday parties. But the guest list is curated by security protocols and social hierarchies that have nothing to do with childhood friendship. This is the paradox of royal childhood in a cottage. The house is small. The world is smaller. A half-mile from Adelaide Cottage, hidden deeper within Windsor Great Park, stands another building. Forest Lodge, Georgian architecture, 3 stories, larger than the cottage, and according to multiple royal correspondents, the eventual permanent residence of the Wales family. Forest Lodge is not currently occupied by William and Catherine. The building requires renovation significant enough that moving in immediately was not feasible in 2022, but the logic is clear. Adelaide Cottage functions as a transitional home, a place to live while children are school-aged and require proximity to Lambrook. Forest Lodge represents the next phase, a home large enough for adult children who visit, staff who must occasionally stay overnight, and the increased formality that comes as William edges closer to kingship. The lodge sits on land once owned by the Crown Estate, transferred to private royal use generations ago. The building itself dates to the 18th century, built as a hunting lodge or estate manager's residence within the sprawling Windsor parklands. It has been updated intermittently, but not recently. Multiple reports suggest that extensive renovations costing several £1 million will be necessary before the family can move in. Who will pay? Likely the Duchy of Cornwall, channeling William's income into a property that will serve his family for decades. Or perhaps the sovereign grant, justified as essential maintenance of a historic building within the royal estate. The funding will remain opaque, buried in annual reports that list total expenditures without itemizing individual projects. Forest Lodge offers something Adelaide Cottage cannot: space for the institution to expand into the domestic sphere. More bedrooms mean visiting dignitaries can stay overnight. Larger reception rooms mean hosting charity events or small state functions on site. The architecture permits a blurring of private and public in ways the cottage actively resists. And as George enters adolescence, the need for that expanded space will intensify. He will require private quarters that can accommodate his own emerging household, his future role as Prince of Wales, the infrastructure of power that follows the heir. The move from Adelaide Cottage to Forest Lodge, when it happens, will be presented as a natural progression. A growing family needs more space, but it will also represent a surrender, the acknowledgement that the small house, the modest life, the 4 bedrooms and commuting staff were only ever temporary. Forest Lodge is where the fairy tale ends and the institution reasserts control. Maria Borrallo arrives at Adelaide Cottage early. She has been the Wales family nanny since George was 8 months old, trained at the elite Norland College, where nannies learn not just childcare, but security awareness, defensive driving, and how to maintain boundaries with media. She does not live at the cottage. She does not have a bedroom waiting for her. She commutes in, spends her day managing the children's schedules, homework, activities, and behavioral expectations, then leaves when her shift ends. How much does she earn? Not disclosed. Norland-trained nannies command salaries ranging from £35,000 to £70,000 annually, depending on experience and employer. Given Borrallo's tenure and the profile of her employers, her salary likely falls at the high end, perhaps exceeding £70,000 when adjusted for overtime, travel, and hazard pay associated with royal protection protocols. She is paid from the Duchy of Cornwall income, a line item somewhere in William's private budget that will never appear in public accounting. Housekeepers, chefs, gardeners, security personnel, each role represents invisible labor that makes the cottage function. These workers arrive daily, perform tasks essential to maintaining the illusion of a simple family life, then disappear. They do not eat meals with the family. They do not appear in photographs. Their names are not released. They exist in the same architectural category as the service corridors Peter Townsend walked in the 1940s parallel infrastructure designed to remain out of sight. Catherine has stated that she cooks meals for the children, that she maintains hands-on involvement in their daily routines. This is admirable. It is also partial truth. She cooks some meals. But when state dinners occur, when official guests visit, when the family schedule demands precision timing across multiple locations, professional staff handle the logistics. The cottage may not have live-in servants, but it functions on the same fundamental principle as Buckingham Palace. Labor is essential, labor is compensated, and labor is never centered in the narrative. How many people does it take to maintain the appearance of simplicity? At minimum, 1 nanny, 2 housekeepers, 1 chef, or contracted catering service, 3 to 5 security officers per shift, rotating in 8-hour blocks gardeners who maintain. Windsor, home park grounds including areas around the cottage maintenance workers who address repairs and system upkeep administrative staff who coordinate schedules and handle correspondence. That's roughly 15 to 20 individuals whose labor makes Adelaide Cottage livable. None of them live there. None of them own the house. None of them will inherit the legacy of having raised future kings in a pink cottage surrounded by trees. Their names will not appear in biographies. Their photographs will not be archived. They are the infrastructure, hidden behind the facade, essential and invisible. Adelaide Cottage costs nothing to rent. William and Catherine pay no mortgage, no property taxes, no fees for occupancy. The house is crown property, offered through the grace and favor tradition that dates back centuries. In theory, grace and favor residences are gifts from the monarch to individuals who have served the crown with distinction. In practice, they are tools of institutional control, a way to house family members, senior staff, and loyal servants without transferring ownership or creating permanent claims to royal property. The system works because it obscures costs. The cottage requires maintenance, roof repairs, plumbing updates, landscaping, security infrastructure. These costs are absorbed into broader royal budgets. The sovereign grant for properties owned by the Crown, or Duchy of Cornwall income for residences occupied by the Prince of Wales. Annual reports provide total figures. £86.3 million in sovereign grant funding for 2022-23, for example, but do not itemize spending by property. This financial opacity is not accidental. It protects the monarchy from scrutiny. If taxpayers knew exactly how much public money funded renovations at Adelaide Cottage, they might ask why a family with private wealth exceeding £20 million needs subsidized housing. They might question whether grace and favor properties serve the public interest or simply perpetuate hereditary privilege. They might demand that the Duchy of Cornwall, which generates £23 million annually, cover all costs associated with the Prince of Wales's residences, removing any taxpayer contribution. But the accounts are not structured that way. The sovereign grant covers official duties and maintenance of occupied royal palaces. The Duchy of Cornwall funds the official, charitable, and private activities of the Prince of Wales and his family. The categories overlap, the boundaries blur, and in that blurring, accountability dissolves. William and Catherine live in a house that costs them nothing. The renovation that made it livable cost between £1.5 million and £3 million, paid by institutional funds. The ongoing maintenance costs tens of thousands annually, paid the same way. The security costs millions annually, paid by the Metropolitan Police budget, which is public money. Added together, and Adelaide Cottage, the modest house, the simple life, the 4 bedrooms cost British taxpayers and duchy income somewhere between £2 million and £5 million annually, when all expenses are included. That is the economics of grace and favor. You receive a house. You pay nothing, and the bill disappears into budgets too complex to parse. In September 2022, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis began attending Lambrook School. The first day of school was photographed. William and Catherine walked their children to the entrance, smiling, casual clothing, no formal ceremonial dress. The images circulated globally, proof that the Wales family was living a normal life in Windsor. But normal is a performance here, carefully staged to create specific impressions. Lambrook School charges approximately £23,000 per child annually, totaling roughly £69,000 per year for all 3 children. The school offers extensive grounds, excellent facilities, small class sizes, and a curriculum designed for children of Britain's elite. It is not a comprehensive state school serving diverse socio-economic backgrounds. It is a private institution where classmates include children of bankers, tech executives, and hereditary aristocracy. George, Charlotte, and Louis will never attend class with children whose parents work in factories, drive buses, or clean hotels. Their peer group is pre-selected by tuition costs that exclude the majority of British families. This is not a criticism of the school itself, which by all accounts provides excellent education. It is an observation about the gap between narrative and reality. The narrative is normalcy, royal children attending school, doing homework, playing sports like any other kids. The reality is an educational experience accessible only to the wealthiest 5% of the population, funded by duchy income that derives from hereditary land ownership. Catherine walks the children to school. This is photographed. What is not photographed? The security vehicles that travel ahead, the protection officers who sweep the route, the protocols established with school administration to manage royal presence on campus. What looks like a casual morning school run is actually a coordinated operation involving multiple personnel and contingency plans for security threats. The family attends church at Windsor Castle. They are photographed walking to services, dressed casually, George in a sweater, Charlotte in a dress. What is not photographed? The fact that attending church at Windsor Castle is not a neighborhood parish experience. It is attending services within a property closed to the public, surrounded by security, with a congregation consisting primarily of royal household staff and invited guests. The performance is family attending church. The reality is institutional ritual conducted within controlled space. The cottage itself performs normalcy through architectural restraint. 4 bedrooms, not 40. Pink exterior, not stone fortress. Trees hiding the house from view, creating the impression of rural seclusion. But the cottage exists inside Windsor Home Park, a private royal estate. The seclusion is not rustic countryside. It is expensive isolation, maintained by infrastructure and security that costs millions annually. Every element of the Wales family's Windsor life is a negotiation between institutional necessity and public perception. They must appear relatable enough to justify monarchy in a democratic age. They must remain elevated enough to preserve the mystique that makes monarchy compelling. Adelaide Cottage is the physical space where that negotiation occurs, small enough to seem humble, grand enough to remain royal, hidden enough that the machinery stays invisible. Why does Britain still have a monarchy in 2025? The question persists beneath every story about royal residences, every photograph of royal children attending school, every renovation budget that avoids itemization. The institution survives not through constitutional necessity. The monarch as political power is largely ceremonial, but through cultural inertia and economic entanglement. The Crown Estate generates revenue that flows to the government. The sovereign grant returns a portion of that revenue to fund the monarchy. The system self-justifies. The monarchy pays for itself through property it inherited centuries ago when power was not democratically distributed. Adelaide Cottage exists within this arrangement. It is Crown property, meaning it belongs to the institution of monarchy, not to any individual. When William eventually becomes king, He will not own Adelaide Cottage. It will still belong to the Crown, and when William dies, his children will not inherit it. The Crown will determine who occupies it next. This is the central paradox of royal life. Immense privilege with no ownership, beautiful homes with no permanence, security and stability built on an institution that could theoretically be abolished by parliamentary vote. What William and Catherine understand, and what Adelaide Cottage represents, is that monarchy in the 21st century survives through performance. They must appear modern without threatening tradition. They must seem accessible without losing mystique. They must raise children who look normal while preparing them for hereditary roles that contradict every democratic principle. Britain claims to value. The cottage is the stage where this performance occurs. The pink facade is the set. The 4 bedrooms are the dressing rooms. And the audience, millions of people who watch, comment, critique, and occasionally question, are kept at a distance measured in acres and security protocols. Can a 4-bedroom house save the monarchy? No, but it can delay the reckoning. It can create the illusion that royal life is relatable, that wealth does not corrupt, that hereditary power is compatible with modern values. It can buy time. And time is what every institution needs when the foundations are shifting beneath it. Adelaide Cottage will not last forever as the Wales family home. George will age out of childhood. Charlotte and Louis will forge their own paths. The family will move to Forest Lodge, or return to London, or occupy some other property within the royal estate portfolio. And when they leave, the cottage will remain Crown property, available for the next occupant, waiting. What the cottage cannot do is answer the questions it raises. Who benefits from grace and favor housing in 2025? Is it justifiable to spend millions in public and quasi-public funds maintaining residences for individuals born into hereditary privilege? Does the monarchy serve a function valuable enough to warrant its cost? And if the answer is yes, why is that cost hidden behind accounting structures designed to prevent scrutiny? The cottage is beautiful. The history is real. The gilded dolphins and Greco-Egyptian marble carry the weight of centuries. But beauty is not justification. History is not argument. And the pink facade cannot obscure the truth that Adelaide Cottage, like every grace and favor property, like every royal residence, like the institution itself, exists because power once seized land and called it inheritance. Peter Townsend lived here and loved a princess he could not marry because the institution forbade it. Queen Adelaide visited and took tea in gardens that now serve a future king. George, Charlotte, and Louis sleep in 4 bedrooms, unaware that the house itself is evidence of an arrangement they will inherit but never chose. The cottage holds all of this: the love story, the scandal, the renovation budgets never disclosed, the labor never credited, the children growing up in a cage disguised as a garden. Stand at the edge of Windsor Home Park one more time. The mist has lifted. The cottage glows soft pink in morning light. And the question remains, how long can beauty obscure the cost? How many more generations will live in grace and favor houses before someone asks who paid, who pays now, and whether the debt can ever be settled? The cottage has no answer. It simply stands, waiting for the next act in a performance that has run for centuries. The foundations are shifting. The walls are still standing. For now,